Okay, we're working on a knife. I'm going to call it a kit. This is going to be mostly focused on the Jiffy sander conversion, but there's a few things that are excuse me, going to be useful with the original 4x36 host. One of them is going to be that just starting out, I've got these blocks and they're not perfect. So I've already started taking them down to flat, but basically the flatter we get them, the fewer gaps we're going to have in the handle of the blade. And a new belt, that was getting to be an exercise in frustration. These blocks sanded flat, you see when we put them inside edge to inside edge, we don't really have a gap. Sanding these blocks flat, anywhere you put pressure is where you're going to be sanding the most. So you're really wanting to make sure that you're putting a fairly even pressure on the block, move it around so that you're not creating a bevel, like this direction by pushing. Like if you push on this corner is going to bend just a touch and it's going to sand fastest. And so you're going to have a low spot when you put it up against the other block. I'd like to use some of this red as a spacer, epoxy these on, and we'll clamp them. And so we'll have a real fine red line between the spine, between the blade itself. It's a full tang blade. We'll have a real fine red line between the walnut and between the blade. I'm doing the glue up on this wood. I've got epoxy all over it. You can see it's all wet right now, but this is the first shot we get at seeing how this wood's going to turn out. I've got this red. Okay, I'm going to grab some clamps, and I've got this piece of plywood right here, this vulcanized spacer, and we're going to clamp it several ways so we get a nice even glue up and get as thin a glue line as we can on the epoxy. But we still want some glue in there. Okay, also I'm hoping you can see it, but right here I've got lines in pencil. Because the grain changes from the top side to the inside, I have kind of a map of what the grain looks like, so that once I get ready to cut out the shape of the handle, I can have it sitting. I can use the portion of the grain and get the colors that I want where, to a degree, that I want them. Anyway, so there's our blocks. These are ready to start gluing up to the handle, but we also have the bolster. The brass bolster I've started shaping. You can see how I've got it nice and shiny right now. This is going to be nearly our last opportunity to touch this front edge because it's going to be on the blade. Here's the blade we're using, and I'll show you why I say that. So you can see what's going on here is that once this is fixed to the blade, which it's going to need to be first thing so that we have a reference point for the handle to sit against. But once this is fixed to the blade, any work we do on this top edge is going to scratch the blade up. So these basically need to be finished. The only thing that they really that you could get away with at times, you could do a little bit of fine polish wheel with a fine cotton buff. But for the most part, what you see here is what you're going to end up with. But this and the handles, these can all be shaped on the blade. This right here really needs to be completed. There's not any good way of fixing mistakes here, so take your time. Okay, we've got a rough shape cut out. Been using the Jiffy sander conversion, do some of these inside corners, kind of like this. And then also using the top of the slack belt up here to run some of the outside corners. Keep a nice easy curve on here. I've got pencil lines marked on here for the blade tang so I know where it's at. But this just lets me get nice and close in a nice easy curve without leaving hard lines or anything that I'm going to be fighting with later. So I've got these are still a hair oversized, but nice shape to work with. And now we'll go ahead and glue them on the tang. You can see we got kind of a whole menagerie of clamps on here. We've got one long one. You can see this one right here is touching the point, so that's keeping this handle scale snugged up against the bolster. This, if you don't pay attention to that, then this joint right here can work loose. Excuse me. Can leave just a bit of a gap. Sorry, I didn't think about the sunburn on my hand. Anyway, you can see the bolster is put on here. This is all finished up. You can see the shine because we're not going to be able to mess with it anymore. The holes were countersunk and the pins were polished before they were peened in. This gives you the best chance at having an invisible line because there's no dirt or anything to open up that gap. I guess I could make this a little easier to see. Here you can see we've got the red liners. You can see the grain flows nice on this wood, kind of across the handle. The bolsters weren't quite square on the bottom, so test fitting against the wood, we had a real nice glassy cut on the end grain, and so a real fine file with a safe edge let me square the bolster up to the tang so that this end grain fit nicely. We want it to, ideally it's going to look like it grew there, but you can see the red liners also. These scales are done one at a time, one scale and then drilled for the location of the pins, and then the other scale. So right now the second scale is setting up, and then once it's completed we'll have sort of a drill guide for the pins so we can go run back across. This is where it starts really showing. All up till now everything you do is important, but this is where it all starts to come together. So we'll be back. Okay, here's where we sit right now. We've got the handle scales basically rough shaped. Put the Loveless pins in there, or bolt screws, I don't know what you call them. Anyway, at this point we are trying to do some of the final shaping, some of the inside corners on the bolster here on the handle, and right now I've got a heavier grip belt on here, so it makes it a hair touchy, but I've been able to use this top small wheel to get some of these inside corners, and then also able to keep these the outside corners real nice on the slack belt, just to touch it down just like this until the belt just kisses the spine. This is going to get cleaned up some more. I don't have any real fine belts right now. I believe the finest I have is 180, so there's going to be a hair more hand sanding. Okay, just a shot of the finished knife. You can see the brass has been polished up. Basically just working through the grits. 300 grit, I believe 240 off of the Jiffy, and then 320, 600, 1200 on the knife itself. This is the walnut feather crotch scales. These were supposed to have been stabilized. They weren't, so there was quite a bit of extra handwork involved in putting some finish on them. I went ahead and used a birchwood KC Troil finish. Loveless bolts, you can see what they do. They kind of give you the little target. Guys, I should mention that nothing really, knife is no good without a sheath. So here's the sheath. This is just a homemade stain on a leather sheath to give you the brown. This is more of a show sheath. Hold on just a second. I say it's for show just because kind of shows off the knife more. Gives you the handle. You get to see a full shot of the handle, just nice and trim. If this was going to be a field sheath, then I'd add a little more security. It would be a little bulkier sheath. But this one, for the purpose the knife is going to serve, I think this will do real well.